Lee Sung-ji hated interruptions. His office in downtown Chicago was built like a vault, soundproof walls, a single desk made of reclaimed oak, no decorations except for a bronze sculpture of a running shoe his father gave him before he died. The silence in that room was deliberate. It kept people nervous. It kept them quick. At 41, Lee didn't just run Apex footwear. He controlled it. Every stitch, every sole, every hire. His team knew the drill. Arrive 15 minutes early, speak only when spoken to, wear muted colors, keep emotions at the door. And women? They had to look a certain way. Slim, angular, professional in the way his mother had drilled into him since childhood. She'd been a gallery owner in Seoul before moving to the States. Cold, precise. She used to pull at his cheeks when he smiled too wide as a boy, telling him softness was for the weak. She made him believe that only certain types of people deserved respect. He'd built his entire life around that belief. Your 1 o'clock is ready, his assistant Diane said over the intercom. Lee tapped his pen against the desk. Background: Stanford MBA, fluent in Mandarin and French. 7 years at a Fortune 500. Glowing references. He didn't ask anything else. Numbers spoke louder than people. Send her in. The door swung open, and the temperature in the room changed. Florence Carter walked in like she'd been there before. No hesitation. No fake politeness. She wore a lavender wrap dress that didn't hide her curves, it showcased them. Her skin was rich and deep, her curls pulled into a low bun, her makeup simple but striking. She extended her hand. Mr. Lee, I appreciate the opportunity. Lee stood, paused a second too long, then shook her hand. Her grip was solid, warm, certain. He pulled back like he'd been burned. Sit, he said, nodding toward the chair across from him. She did. No fidgeting. No small talk. He opened her file, but didn't really read it. He was too busy trying not to stare. She caught him looking. Didn't flinch. Your resume is strong, Lee said, keeping his voice flat. But you were in a senior role. Why step down to be an executive assistant? Florence didn't hesitate. Because I'd rather learn from someone who sets impossible standards than work for someone who settles. You don't settle, Mr. Lee. He leaned back, studying her. That was a good answer. Too good. And what makes you think you can handle my standards? She smiled. Not sweetly. Sharply. Because I don't just meet expectations. I rewrite them. For the first time in 5 years, Lee almost smiled back. When she left, he sat there for a long time, just staring at the door. Diane poked her head in. So, hire her, Lee said, adjusting his watch. 2-week trial. If she's not a fit, she's gone. Diane raised an eyebrow. You sure about this? He didn't answer. But deep down, he knew Florence Carter was about to wreck everything he'd built. The first week felt like walking on broken glass. Not because Florence struggled. She didn't. She was flawless. Every meeting was prepped before he asked. Every file was organized in a way that made his life easier without him noticing. She swapped the overhead lights in his office to softer bulbs because she noticed he squinted during afternoon calls. She stocked peppermint tea in the break room. He hadn't had that since his grandmother died. He started finding excuses to talk to her, to walk with her instead of ahead of her. One Thursday, after a brutal call with investors, they walked out of the conference room side by side. You handled that better than I expected, Lee said. Florence glanced at him. Thanks. I thought you were going to snap at him, but you didn't. That's discipline. He stopped walking. You're reading me already? You're not complicated. Power with precision. Never sloppy. He stared at her. And you? She turned to face him fully. Me? I'm chaos wrapped in confidence. He didn't move. Didn't breathe. Then he cleared his throat and walked away before he said something he'd regret. The rest of the week passed in a blur. Lee found himself noticing things he'd never paid attention to before. The way Florence tilted her head when she was thinking. The way she hummed softly while organizing files. The way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching. By Friday, he was barely sleeping. By the second week, the whispers started. People noticed Lee was different. Softer. He asked Florence's opinion on things assistants never touched. He stayed late when she stayed late. He laughed once during a meeting. The entire floor was talking about it. Diane cornered him in his office Friday afternoon. You like her? Lee didn't look up from his laptop. She does her job well. She's Curvy, Lee, which you've avoided your whole career like it's contagious. So either admit what this is, or let her go before you embarrass yourself. She's talented. That's all. Diane sighed. You can't even lie convincingly anymore. That woman isn't just breaking your rules. She's erasing them. Lee stayed silent. Because Diane was right. That night, Florence knocked on his door just before 7. Coat over her arm. You forgot to sign the Brennan deal, she said, holding out a folder. Their fingers brushed when he took it. She looked up at him. Need anything else? His voice came out quieter than he meant it to. No. She tilted her head, studying him. You look like someone fighting himself. He blinked. I know the look, she said softly. Just don't let fear win. Then she walked out. Lee sat alone in his office until midnight. The city lights blinked outside. His coffee went cold. He couldn't stop replaying her words. Don't let fear win. What the hell was he afraid of? He'd never been afraid of anyone. But Florence Carter scared him. Not because of what she was. Because of what she made him feel. He'd spent 41 years building walls. And in 2 weeks, she'd knocked them all down. The next morning, she wasn't at her desk. Lee's chest tightened. Then he saw the note folded neatly on her chair. Mr. Lee, you were right. This isn't professional. So I'm stepping away before we both do something we can't undo. Thank you for everything. Florence Carter. He read it 3 times. The air felt thinner, like she'd taken the oxygen with her. He crumpled the note in his fist and threw it across the room. Then he sat down and put his head in his hands. The next few days were brutal. Lee went back to being ice. But this time it wasn't power. It was pain. He snapped at people over minor mistakes. Skipped lunches. Locked himself in his office for hours. Meetings ran long because he couldn't focus. Emails piled up because he couldn't bring himself to care. Everyone noticed. But no one said anything. Except Diane. She walked into his office Wednesday afternoon and closed the door behind her. You lost something real, she said. Lee didn't look up. She quit. You pushed her away. She crossed a line. No, Diane said. She broke through. And that's exactly what you needed. Lee finally looked up. His eyes were red. What am I supposed to do, Diane? Chase after her. Beg her to come back. You're supposed to be honest. With her. With yourself. She turned to leave, then stopped at the door. You know what your problem is, Lee? You think control is strength. But real strength is letting go. The door closed. Lee sat there for a long time. Then he pulled out his phone. Sunday night, Lee sat on his balcony with a glass of whiskey he didn't drink, scrolling through Florence's Instagram. Photos of her at conferences, smiling with friends. A quote she'd posted that morning. Never shrink yourself to fit someone else's expectations. He stared at it for a long time. Then something stopped him cold. An event flyer. Rise Up. Honoring women of color in business. Keynote speaker, Florence Carter. Location, the Drake Hotel, Chicago. Date, tomorrow night. His pulse quickened. He grabbed his phone and made a call. The ballroom was packed. Silk gowns. Champagne glasses. Laughter echoing off high ceilings. Lee arrived in a charcoal suit, blending into the crowd. He stood near the back, watching the stage. Then the lights dimmed, and she walked out. Florence stood on stage in a deep burgundy gown, her curls loose and wild, her presence commanding every eye in the room. Good evening, she said, her voice strong and clear. My name is Florence Carter, and I'm here to talk about taking up space. The room fell silent. When I walk into a room, she continued, I know what people see. They see my skin. They see my body. They see everything I am before I even open my mouth. She paused. For a long time, I let that define me. I made myself smaller, quieter, less, because I thought that's what it took to belong. Lee's chest tightened. But then I realized something. Florence said, the world doesn't need me to be less. It needs me to be more. More bold. More honest. More myself. She looked out at the crowd. So I stopped apologizing. I stopped shrinking. And I started taking up every inch of space I deserve. The crowd erupted in applause. Lee couldn't breathe. He watched her finish her speech, take her bow, and disappeared through the backstage. And then he did something he'd never done before. He went after her. He found her in a hallway behind the stage, alone, checking her phone. Florence. She looked up. Shock flickered across her face. Lee, what are you doing here? He stepped closer. I came to hear you speak. She crossed her arms. Why? Because I needed to see you. She didn't respond. Lee took a breath. You were right. About me. About everything. Florence's expression softened, but she didn't move. I spent my whole life building rules, Lee said. Rules about control. About perfection. About who deserved to be in my world. And then you walked in and destroyed every single one. He stepped closer. I was terrified. Because you made me feel things I'd spent 40 years avoiding. And I didn't know how to handle it. So you pushed me away, Florence said quietly. Yes. He swallowed hard. And I've regretted it every single day since. She looked at him for a long moment. What do you want from me, Lee? He pulled an envelope from his jacket. This should have gone through HR first. But I wanted to give it to you myself. What is it? A job offer. Vice President of Innovation. Full salary. Full authority. Full respect. Florence took the envelope but didn't open it. Why would I take that? She asked. He stepped even closer. Because you didn't just change my rules, Florence. You changed me. And I don't want to go back to who I was before you. She studied his face, searching for something. This isn't just about a job, is it? She said. No. His voice cracked. It's not. She smiled. Small. Real. I'll think about it. Then she walked past him, leaving him alone in the hallway. She didn't say yes. Not for 6 days. Lee checked his phone every hour. No calls. No texts. Nothing. He tried to focus on work. Failed miserably. Diane brought him coffee one morning and found him staring out the window. Still nothing? She asked. He shook his head. Give her time. You broke her trust. She's deciding if you deserve it back. On the 7th day, he found a handwritten letter on his desk. His hands shook as he opened it. Mr. Lee, I don't want a title you're offering out of guilt. I don't want a position you created to fix a mistake. I want to know, if I never came back, would I still matter to you? FC. Lee sat back in his chair, heart pounding. He'd spent his whole life chasing perfection. But Florence wasn't asking for perfection. She was asking for the truth. He grabbed his phone and typed a message. Can I show you something? 3 dots appeared. Then it disappeared. Then it appeared again. Where? My place. Upstate. Tomorrow at noon. I'll send a car. A long pause. Then, okay. The car came at noon. The ride was silent. When Florence arrived, she didn't see what she expected. No mansion. No flash. Just a small lakeside cabin. Wooden porch. Rocking chairs. Trees everywhere. Lee stood outside in jeans and a t-shirt. Barefoot. She'd never seen him like this. Welcome, he said simply. Florence stepped out of the car slowly. This is where you go? He nodded. It's the only place I ever feel like myself. She looked around. The lake was calm. The air smelled like pine and fresh water. And you brought me here, why? Lee walked her to the porch. Because I need to tell you something. And I wanted to do it somewhere real. Florence sat in one of the rocking chairs. The lake shimmered in the distance. Lee knelt in front of her. I built my whole life around control, he said. Perfect images. Perfect people. Perfect order. Because my mother taught me that anything outside of that was weak. Florence listened. She used to tell me I was too soft, that I smiled too much. She'd pull at my face and tell me to toughen up. She made me believe that only certain people mattered. And I carried that with me every single day. He paused, his voice breaking slightly. Then you walked in. And you didn't fit any of my rules. You were everything I'd been taught to avoid. But you were also everything I didn't know I needed. Florence's eyes glistened. You challenged me. You saw through me. And you didn't apologize for who you are. Not once. He took her hands. I don't want a company without you, Florence. I don't want a life without you. I want to love you the way you deserve. Completely, honestly, without fear. A tear rolled down her cheek. She stood. Walked to the edge of the porch. Looked out at the water. Then she turned back. Do you know what I see when I look at you now? She asked. Lee shook his head. I see a man who's finally becoming real. And I don't want the version of you who hides. I want the one standing here right now. He stood up. I'm still learning. I know, she whispered. She took his hand. That's why I'm here. They stood there for a moment, the breeze moving through the trees, the lake lapping gently at the shore. Then Lee pulled her close and kissed her. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't planned. But it was real. They spent the afternoon walking along the lake, talking about everything. Her childhood in Atlanta. His regrets. Her dreams of starting her own company one day. His fear that he'd wasted his life chasing the wrong things. Somewhere between the trees and the water, they stopped pretending. They were just two people finding their way back to something real. As the sun started to set, they sat on the dock, feet dangling over the water. So what happens now? Florence asked. Lee looked at her. What do you want to happen? She smiled. I want you to stop hiding. I want you to show up as yourself. Not the version you think you're supposed to be. And the job offer? I'll take it, she said. But not because you offered it. Because I earned it. He laughed. You absolutely did. She leaned her head on his shoulder. This is going to be complicated, she said. I know. People are going to talk. Let them. She looked up at him. You sure about this? He kissed her forehead. I've never been more sure of anything. 3 months later, Apex Footwear announced a major change. Lee Sung-ji names Florence Carter Vice President of Innovation, first woman of color on the executive board. But the headlines didn't tell the real story. The real story was about a man who built walls and a woman who walked straight through them. Florence stepped into her role with fire and brilliance. She transformed the company's culture, launched diversity initiatives, hired people who'd never gotten a chance before. She created mentorship programs for young women of color. She redesigned the company's marketing to reflect real people, not just models. Sales went up. Employee satisfaction went up. The company landed on the cover of Fast Company. But more than that, Florence taught Lee how to live outside his own head. They were seen at charity galas, jazz clubs, walking through Millennium Park holding hands. People talked. Some whispered. Some judged. They didn't care. One evening, after a particularly long day, they sat in Lee's apartment overlooking the city. You know what's funny? Florence said, curled up beside him on the couch. What? 6 months ago, I never would have imagined this. Us. Lee kissed the top of her head. Me neither. You scared me at first, she admitted. You were so cold. So controlled. I was terrified of you, he said. She looked up at him. Really? You have no idea. You walked into my office and turned my entire world upside down in about 5 minutes. She laughed. Good. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Lee said, I love you. Florence froze. Then smiled. Say it again. I love you, Florence Carter. She kissed him. Slow and soft. I love you too. 1 year later, at the same lakeside cabin where he first told her the truth, Lee stood on the porch holding a small black box. Florence leaned against the railing, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. Come here, he said. She turned, saw the box, raised an eyebrow. Is this a promotion? She teased. He smiled. Only if it lasts forever. He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold band. No diamonds. Just gold. He got down on one knee. You walked into my life and destroyed every rule I thought I needed. You showed me what real strength looks like. What real love looks like. And now I want to spend the rest of my life rewriting everything with you. His voice shook. Will you marry me, Florence Carter? Tears spilled down her cheeks. She dropped to her knees in front of him and cupped his face in her hands. Yes, she whispered. Yes, yes, yes. She pulled him into her arms and kissed him as the sun disappeared behind the trees. The wedding was small, intimate, held on a hillside in Napa Valley overlooking rows of vineyards. 40 people. No press. Just love. Florence wore a simple cream gown with delicate lace sleeves. Lee wore a navy suit and cried when she walked down the aisle. Her mother sobbed through the entire ceremony. His father, who Lee had barely spoken to in years, gave a toast that made everyone cry. Diane clinked her glass and said, about damn time. They danced under string lights as the sun set. Lee held Florence close and whispered, this is the best decision I've ever made. She smiled against his chest. Took you long enough to figure it out. Their honeymoon took them across Europe, Greece, Italy, Portugal. No schedules, no emails, no meetings, just them. They wandered through ancient ruins in Athens, got lost in the streets of Lisbon, ate pasta in a tiny restaurant in Rome where the owner insisted they try every dish on the menu. One night in a small village in Tuscany, they stumbled upon a street festival. Music poured from speakers. Locals danced in the square. Lee grabbed Florence's hand and pulled her into the crowd. They danced under string lights while strangers clapped and cheered. This is what life should feel like, Lee said, spinning her around. Florence laughed. This is what it feels like when you stop hiding. Months passed. Back in Chicago, Florence thrived. The company grew. The culture shifted. People felt seen and heard in ways they never had before. Lee watched her lead with pride and gratitude. They bought a house by the lake. Adopted a dog named Riley, a golden retriever who thought he was a lapdog. Weekends were spent hiking, cooking together, reading on the porch, being quiet together. They were building something bigger than success. They were building a home. One rainy afternoon in April, Lee walked into their bedroom and found Florence sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at something in her hand. "You okay?" he asked. She looked up, eyes wide, shimmering. "I'm late." He blinked. "For what?" She held up a small white stick. 2 pink lines. Lee froze. Then his knees buckled. He dropped to the floor, wrapped his arms around her waist, and laughed through tears. "We're having a baby," he whispered into her stomach. She nodded, crying too. "We are." He looked up at her, eyes red and full. "You've already changed my whole world, Florence. I can't believe we get to do this." She ran her fingers through his hair. "We're going to be parents. You're going to be an amazing mother." She smiled. "And you're going to be an amazing father." They sat there on the floor, holding each other, as rain drummed against the windows. 9 months later, snow fell softly over Chicago. Lee stood in a hospital room at 3 in the morning, holding his newborn daughter. She had Florence's brown skin and his gray eyes. Her tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb. Her little chest rose and fell with each breath. "She's perfect," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. Florence, exhausted and glowing, smiled from the bed. "Just like her mama." Lee laughed. "Just like both of you." He walked over and carefully placed their daughter in Florence's arms. Florence looked down at their baby and whispered, "Hi, sweet girl. We've been waiting for you." The baby yawned. Lee sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Florence, one hand on their daughter's tiny head. "What should we name her?" Florence asked. Lee thought for a moment. "Grace." Florence looked up at him. "Grace." He nodded. "Because that's what you gave me. Grace I didn't deserve. And now we get to give it to her." Florence's eyes filled with tears again. Grace Carter Lee. Perfect. They sat there in the quiet hospital room as snow continued to fall outside, watching their daughter sleep. "This is what forever looks like," Florence whispered. Lee kissed her temple. "Yeah, it is." And it was. It looked like a woman who refused to shrink. It looked like a man who finally learned to grow. It looked like a baby girl who would grow up knowing she could be anything. It looked like love that rewrote everything. If this story stirred something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and let me know what you felt and hit that subscribe button. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. See you in the next one.